that was set up by the commission to take a look at having a discussion with our staff and consultants about our strategic plan implementation, and specifically looking at issues around our developments and considerations about things like location, site selection, physical features, and other things that may have an impact on where we, in fact, decide to make a decision to proceed with a specific development. So we thought it would be good to have a conversation about that and to be able to share it. The staff and consultants prepared a questionnaire that was sent out to commissioners in advance of the meeting to give some preliminary feedback that will be shared with us and with those of you all who are participating on YouTube as part of this session. So I want to not delay this conversation, but go ahead and proceed. I'll turn it to you, President Andrews, and you can introduce Melissa and we can move forward.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, commissioners, members of the public HOC team. As stated, this is really a work session and an opportunity to have dialogue around development priorities. It's important to start with a few disclaimers, however. So if you could go to the next slide. We want to just make sure that it's clear in terms of expectation management that this is not a meeting in which we're going to set policy or adopt firm position. Of course, each development opportunity is unique. And we did circulate a survey, which the results were anonymous. So it's up to commissioners to express their sentiments on these different points, but ultimately the goal is to have an opportunity for some open dialogue amongst the commissioners so that we have an opportunity to hear your thoughts in regards to how we advance development. The other huge disclaimer is that this is not a perfect survey. There definitely are different approaches to cultivating and creating a survey. In this instance, some of the selections are not mutually exclusive. It's really just to prompt the conversation, and that's what we hope happens here today. We are joined with our facilitator from Invisio, Megan Brodman Bishop. Thank you for joining us this evening, and I will turn it over to her to share some of the feedback that you've provided and help facilitate this discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, President Andrews. As President Andrews mentioned, my name is Megan Brodman Bishop. I'm a planning and performance coach at Invisio. So I've been working with the team over the last couple of months. Just before we get into the survey results, I just wanted to go over a couple of very quick housekeeping notes. So first of all, we do have 5 topics to go through today. So we have quite a bit of content to cover. So if we look at that time-wise, that's around 7 to 10 minutes of discussion in each area. We might have more in some areas, less in others, but I just want to be really mindful of the kind of time constraints here and make sure that we do give time for each area to be discussed. For each topic, I will start with a very quick review of the results, and then I'll open it up to a broader discussion for the commissioners and the rest of the team. I know you are all in the same room, but I am here, I'm virtual, so it would be helpful for me if you could just raise your hand when you have something to share, and then I can call on you to speak. For folks that are participating, please do be mindful of the time. Ensure that everyone has a chance to speak. If I find that we're going over time, I will jump in and move us along. Please do not take offense. That is what I'm here for, to keep the conversation moving. And lastly, just note that we do have some buffer time at the end of this session. So we will have 5 or 10 minutes spare where we can either talk about some additional topics that you wanted to be covered or discussed, and we can also loop back to any other topics at that point that you want to revisit or discuss further. So that's just kind of what we're looking at here for the session today. If we could go to the next slide, please. All right, so we're going to dive right into this here. So this is our first topic here around site selection. So just for anyone who might not have seen the survey, the commissioners were posed the question: in deciding whether HOC should prioritize a specific development opportunity, the commission weighs multiple competing priorities. Please rank the following locational attributes in the order of priority you give them when evaluating a potential site for development, where 1 is the highest priority and 7 is the lowest. So just for some quick context, because I know this is the first graph that we're seeing this evening, we've ranked these in order from highest priority to lowest priority. So that means based on the average rankings, which you can see here, those are those black bolded numbers, 3, 3.3, 3.7. In this case, we can see that for site selection, we had a top priority was synergy with existing properties. That was the one that kind of came out as the most important across the board on average. We can also see that those lowest priorities here were area of opportunity and government-owned land. It is important to note here that generally there was a pretty close spread amongst these responses. I think this really highlights that a lot of these factors are overlapping, they are interrelated, so we do see quite a bit of variance in responses. One area that I just particularly wanted to note here is if we take a look at area of opportunity, we can see here that one commissioner actually rated this as their top priority, while 2 other commissioners rated this as their lowest priority. So we do have a bit of kind of differences here in thoughts on this particular area, which I also think speaks to that need for flexibility in these priorities. But what we want to do here is pass this off and, give you your chance to say, is there any context that you want to share with the commissioners about your rankings? Were there any other factors that you think are important to consider in site selection? And just open it up for a bit of a discussion here on these factors and anything else you contribute.
Could you just for a moment reiterate the point you made about that there was some disparity on one factor where 2 commissioners rated highest and 2
And the other way around.
and the other way around? Which one did you say? Which
Area.
So area of opportunity. Yeah, so you can see here, so basically, the blues, reds, and yellows are different commissioners' responses. So for example, in this case, the blue response, that commissioner rated area of opportunity as their highest priority. They ranked proximity to transit as their second highest, underinvested location as their third highest, and so on. So for area of opportunity, that's why we can see 1 person ranked it highest and 2 ranked it the lowest. Is anything unclear about how the graph looks, or does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I suppose to spoil the anonymity, I was the one who ranked area of opportunity as my highest, and because I think that is, placing affordable housing in areas of opportunity is, has been demonstrated to, provide higher results for the tenants, and to create affordable housing in places where there is access to good schools, to to other resources. There's been a lot of research that has demonstrated that produces greater outcomes for the tenants, for low-income individuals. That is not to say that we should not invest in underinvested areas that have been historically underinvested. Those places need to be lifted up as well. But I guess, I looked at these options as, when thinking about location, a number of these there's redundancy in some of these, there's overlap. Some of them are not mutually exclusive. But in terms of thinking about what we would want to prioritize, if there were choices that had to be made, I guess my preference is certainly to, place more affordable housing in areas of opportunity. I guess one additional point I would just add to that is, when I joined the commission, it was at a time when there was a lot of, there was a boundary study going on with the schools, which was very controversial. And I was very supportive of that boundary study. But to me, one of the big issues was that if we want to desegregate our schools, we have to desegregate our neighborhoods also. And so, I see our role as, helping to advance that mission. And, by creating opportunities for our residents. So, to me, areas of opportunity, transit-oriented development, those are the areas that are going to give our residents the best opportunities.
Thanks for your comments, Commissioner Markowitz. And I will also just say, right, like this list here doesn't mean that, you're not going to pursue underinvested locations or anything. As said, this is merely for discussion. So we're not saying that these other things aren't important. So Markowitz, I think you kind of mentioned that, but yes, that's a very good point. Chair Priest, I think I just heard, did you have some comments you wanted to share as well?
No, I was going to say the areas of opportunity to me could be incorporate some of these other factors, for example, proximity to amenities, okay, or proximity to transit. Those are things that define to me areas of opportunity. Certainly, in fact, now the issue on government-owned land, I didn't rate that very highly because, government-owned land is not necessarily always the best located asset. And it comes with so many other encumbrances around it in terms of transfer of government-owned property. Now, what we own, and some people look at as government-owned property. Public housing was government-owned property. Okay, and if you travel around the country, it's interesting that years ago, when the government was citing public housing, they thought they were citing it in some of the worst locations in a community. That now have turned out to be some of the most attractive areas for location. And that has had some impact locally about creating some tensions about the people who live there, indigenous to the community now, and the fact other people who want that land because it's so valuable, because it's located to amenities. It's located near downtown. It's located near water. It's located near whatever. They were at that time viewed as being unattractive as a way to get cheap land. So it's interesting policy shifts in that regard. But I also think that we look at a lot of these factors as we look at site location. We are, as a commission, I know since I've been on this commission, a lot of these factors are touched on in the presentations that get made by staff that relates to a specific site. And I think I remember a site that we purchased, and Jack, you remember this, the one we bought out up in Up County, where we were going to be a swap site, and we ended up, I think, turning around and selling that site. At the time, there were some other nuances that were affecting our site selection decision that it ultimately didn't prove to be what we were looking to get done there. Okay. So, but I just think this is a very dynamic subject on site selection.
And I think that's really what the results here are showing, is that it is quite dynamic. There need to be flexible. I do want to see Commissioner Kroom or Commissioner Solomon, did you have any feedback? I know one of you unfortunately wasn't able to respond in the survey, so this would be also your opportunity to share your thoughts, share your feedback. So if we're looking at this, right, like synergy with existing properties is that #1 priority, followed by underinvested location, proximity to transit. Do these rankings resonate with you? Do you agree that this is generally speaking like how things are kind of prioritized around site selection? Do you have different things that are important to you?
Commissioner Kroom, with me, with most of the people that I talk to, they're looking at transit because a lot of them don't have ways to get back and forth from place to place, even though a lot of places that they're building now has places in there that they can go to and they can use. But if they need to go a little bit further, they don't have transportation for that. So I personally, the proximity to transit, that's where I would go with mine.
Great, thank you for sharing that insight, Commissioner Kroom. And Commissioner Solomon, I think if you wanted to share some thoughts?
Not really. I agree with transit, but I have more to say in future pages.
Okay, fair enough. Gotta save up some time for some of those other topics. Any other like feedback on site selection, or are we all kind of on agreement that it's a dynamic area. You have to assess these things on a case-by-case basis. Are there any other comments that we wanted to share before moving along quickly?
One of the things that was not in the area of site selection has to do with pricing, land costs. Okay, because that's a lot of cases, what you look to the government because of the fact they can sometimes give you a break on the land. We saw that just in a recent transaction in Washington, D.C., 176 acres for $1. Okay, but you don't see a lot of those deals around. But land pricing is certainly a major factor, especially when you talk about affordable housing.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I want to acknowledge that these are some of the challenges, right? Because, while I am advocating for more in areas of opportunity, I also recognize that those tend to be the areas that are more expensive. And, sometimes that means we can do less than we might do elsewhere. And so, that kind of gets to the crux of this to some extent is, is it that we are just trying to maximize the total amount of affordable housing that we can create in the county, which if that were our goal, we would, put it where the land is cheapest and where we could, but that might not be where the housing is needed. And that may not lead to the best results. And they would all be 80% units, not, none at 50 or 30 or 65 or, so, there are trade-offs with all of these. And that's what we really need to wrestle with in terms of, and some of this, will be on a deal by deal basis. I know that comment has been made, but, I think in terms of how we're thinking about our overall strategy, what are the trade-offs that we're comfortable with, and saying that, we're willing to make this trade-off in this situation. So
I will add something tied into what you just said, Jeff, and trade-offs is we're all good people here. We're going to get three very impressive people as commissioners. We can have the highest energy ratings. That, of course, costs money. We could have more affordability, but maybe we can't do the energy or accessibility. Everything's a trade-off. But I think we're all professional enough that we're capable of understanding options presented to us. If you want to do the platinum, whatever the standards are for energy, then here's more subsidy we need, or here's less affordability we can afford. And I think the commission is capable of assimilating and absorbing that information and coming up with some rational discussion. And we don't get that necessarily. And we certainly don't see what the end product financing looks like early in the process, so that we can make judgments like that. And that's something I've talked about a little bit before, and I feel very strongly about, is we're capable of understanding, if given the data, and making choices. And it is on a deal by deal basis. It really is. And there might be times we want to accentuate energy over other things, but mostly we're probably all for more affordability, if I had to guess, given our mission. But to me, and I've said this elsewhere, and you'll never guess who was making the comments, we should get financial information and risks early, not when it's fully baked or close to fully baked. Because we know as you come up with pre-development budgets, you've got a pro forma that says, here's where I think the deal is going to look like in our minds. It will change, but we're capable of understanding this and capable of making choices that you present to us. And without acrimony later that something changed in the 10-year development process or whatever Zach has mentioned to us before.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I think I'm gonna jump in here. I think we're kind of going a little bit beyond the topic of site selection here. So I can completely appreciate the comments on financing. I think regardless, that's always going to be a really important conversation to have, but we're really focusing here today on those priorities that we want, staff to consider when they're moving forward, things that are important to you. And I do want to make sure that for some of those later topics that I know are really important to folks, that we have time to get to those. So I am actually going to move us along here to topic 2. If we have some time at the end, we can loop back to this particular further conversation. So in topic 2, we were looking at the area of physical features, and to some extent here thinking about like design decisions once a site is selected. So the question that was posed here is, once a site is selected, the commission must determine the physical features of a development. As before, please rank your priorities for shaping the type of housing provided, where 1 is the highest priority and 7 is the lowest. So interestingly here, as we can see, again, exact same setup, we can see the commissioner responses based on the color. We have rental housing here coming out as kind of a strong top priority, and for sale housing coming in kind of at that lower end of the priority. So there seems to be a bit of consensus on those two ends. As with before, there is quite a bit variance in those middle areas. If we take a look at that housing insecurity features, it's ranked as the second priority overall, but we actually had one commissioner rank this as their lowest priority. So as with before, I'd share here and open it up. Do you have any other comments or context you'd like to share on your rankings around physical features? Again, are there other factors that you think should be taken into account in terms of physical features, and open up that discussion?
I would repeat what I already said, so I don't have anything else to add.
I think just
Unless you want me to repeat.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Okay, good.
I mean, I suppose one thing that was not necessarily covered here is there's also, the choices sometimes between new development and preservation, and the extent to which we're, pursuing one or the other, or want to focus on one or the other. And I don't know where else that would go in terms of the categories that we were offered.
Yeah. One of the disconnect for me on this particular question had to do with the heading, physical features. They didn't resonate to me as physical features. They recognized, they were a good composition of decision points, but I didn't look at them as something. I look at me, physical doesn't mean some of these things. Okay. But within the framework of what was here, I assume you rated them, but I wouldn't call them physical.
I think for the purposes of this, as said, we're not too worried about the survey and the questions. This is really meant to be a jumping off point as discussion. So we did have a comment here on like prioritizing new development versus preservation. Is that something folks want to take a couple of minutes to talk through? Are there any of these rankings that are surprising to you that you think that you want to, take a chance and maybe try to convince your other commissioners to come on board with your opinions here?
I found the rating on the accessibility features to be a little bit surprising. If one of our former commissioners had been here, we would have a long discussion about this. And given that there are certain legislative things being done now dealing with this whole issue about making larger percentage of units handicap accessible, I'm surprised we raised that one so low, but nevertheless, it's important. I think we have embraced the issue around environmental issues and done that very well. And I think that we have something ahead of looking at family housing. And as you all know, part of the policy that we came up with was when we started looking at, we did not want studios. Okay, we were looking more at 2 and 3 bedrooms, especially when we start talking about our lower AMI families that tend to be larger as opposed to single. So I think that's something that we need to look at. And this whole housing insecurity feature, we are finding more and more people who are dealing with housing insecurity. But how do we address that? Because that's really getting down again at that really low tier of income AMI when you're dealing with that whole area. And that talks also about having to have a much bigger financial bundle to cover the kind of subsidy layering necessary to make those things work. But I thought this was an interesting assemblage of things to look at. But I will get away from my first comment.
Yeah, no, it was a little hard, because of the groupings were so different. I mean, it's not rental housing versus accessibility features, for example, or rental housing. The only thing rental housing is versus here is for sale. You know, so it's, yeah.
I was gonna say, interestingly, those did end up at opposite ends of the spectrum here. So there's like a really clear kind of priority area. So we could also look at that middle group a little bit. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Commissioner Markowitz, but continue.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I mean, I think it is some of those others that, you know, where there's decisions to be made about, you know, whether we're focusing more on you know, seniors or families. You know, so some of these can be paired against each other, or but you know, but just a lot of these are not. I mean, we should be incorporating accessibility. We should be incorporating environmental in all of our deals.
Yeah.
So
It's all about choices.
There's always the we should be doing something, but can you do it? And when you can't do it, that's when it comes to these questions of prioritizing. Commissioner Kroom or Commissioner Solomon, did you folks have any additional context you wanted to share? Any kind of thoughts, any other factors that you're like, hey, this should be really important. This is something that you want the staff at HOC to hear about. As I said, this is really your opportunity to share your feedback, and it can be beyond the things listed on the screen here too.
Well, my vote far as it would have been a low vote for the housing sale, because I don't feel as though a lot of our constituents buy houses after they get houses after they come off of HOC. They go and they rent from someone else. And I think we need more opportunities for them to purchase houses, even with the bad credit. You know, just give them more programs where they can get in to buying a house after being on a program, after being on an HOC program. I would have given a very low vote for this particular one. Housing, for sale housing.
and we do have our mortgage finance.
Yeah, but we
programs.
don't have a lot of people that,
Yeah.
we don't have a lot of people that do it. So that would be a low vote for me. I'm the one that didn't vote. My others voted. I didn't vote. So that would be a low vote for me.
Thank you for sharing your input, Commissioner Kroom. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to call on you every time to make sure that you get to share your input now, because we do want to hear your opinion on things. So be prepared for that. But I think you bring like a good point forward, and I think that's an interesting one to consider, and certainly one I think that you know folks can think about moving forward and see what opportunities are there. Commissioner Solomon, are you ready to speak it, or you're still holding out?
No, I don't have trouble speaking.
Waiting, biding your time for later.
Housing insecurity is a huge issue, I think, and it's, I think, the hardest one to address. And I wish I had an answer to that problem. I wish somebody had the answer, but that it's such a critical issue, and I don't know the right way to go about it. And maybe staff does, not for right now, but it's just a tough, it's, you know, homelessness. I mean, it's a difficult area, and it should be a priority, but I wish I could tell you how to go about it. I would disagree with one thing you did say, Megan, which is about financing. Every choice we make, accessibility, rental, owner, it all deals with, do we have the money? And so, and I'm not going to repeat what I said earlier. We need to know earlier what's going on.
Absolutely. Zero disagreements on the fact that financing is important. As said, we're really looking at priorities moving forward, and financing is a piece of that. It just wasn't a focus of the conversation for today, but absolutely noted that that's something that's really important to kind of make sure is covered and discussed in depth moving forward as well on new developments. So I think we're probably good on topic 2. So I'll move us along here to topic 3, please. So here we're getting into some of those affordability levels, getting a little bit more into that conversation around finances as well. So we had here, all commissioners have expressed that a strong priority is to create as many affordable units as possible, using market rate housing as a tool to help subsidize affordable housing alongside all other forms of subsidy. But given limited resources, there are often trade-offs. Assuming each of the following required the same commitment of resources, please rank your priority for affordability, where 1 is highest priority and 3 is lowest. Quick, round of applause. We have some consensus on this one here. So generally speaking, everyone felt that more units at 80% below was the lowest priority. And general consensus is that focus on units building units in the 30% or 50% or below range. So understanding that this does need to be assessed for every deal, that the finances do need to be reviewed, we are really just trying to get here some general consensus or understanding of what your target or priority is for those affordability levels. So really what we're getting here is, would you prioritize fewer units that are more affordable or more units that are less affordable? So as usual song and dance here. I assume folks probably have some comments to share here, so I'll open it up for conversation.
I think collectively as a commission, we certainly have been focused on maximizing the number of units that we can do for people at 30% of income. But we also recognize the fact that our model is building mixed income housing. Okay. And so a lot of cases, and we know this, that the only way we're able to do that is through, the way that we, cross-collateralize what we do. Okay. And so I think having a goal of, we want to make sure that the minimum number of our units are affordable, every deal we do. Okay. And then maximize it up to the point that we have sufficient capital to be able to afford to ratchet that up. If we can get grant money from someone that says, we're going to give you $2 million to be used for increasing your affordability range, sure, we can do that. But money right now has not been, we've been very fortunate that we've been able to do what we've done because of tools we've created, like the Housing Production Fund and other things like that we have been able to do that. Because without those kinds of tools, it's really tough to get down to that band at 30% and lower, which we'd like to be there as much as we can, but we also recognize that we've got to do that span from 80 to, and if you look at a lot of other jurisdictions, they're at 120%. Okay, and calling that affordable.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been said, there's probably, and I'm glad to see there's general consensus here. We've set a minimum of 30% for overall percentage of units that are at affordable rates, 80% or below. Within that, I think we want to maximize it, how deep we can go. The deepest amount of affordability, the deeper amount of affordability, the better. And I recognize that this is where there are trade-offs. I have been very appreciative that, especially, over the last couple of years, the staff has been very creative in finding ways to, include more 30% units. And I know there's been some recent deals that are being brought to us that also have, where the financing may be switching up and in ways that actually allow for not just more 30% units, but more affordable units overall. What I don't know is like what I would love to maximize overall number of affordable units as well. I don't, but I also am very supportive of the idea of mixed income housing, which I think produces better results for our tenants as well. I don't know what the right percentage is, whether 30% is too low for us, whether we should be aiming higher than 30%. 30% seems to be a good number for now. But if some of the deals that have been brought to us lately, go higher, which is great. I don't know, at what point there, some of the benefits of mixed income, we may start to lose if we go too high. And it sounds funny coming out of my mouth saying, I want to make sure that there's sufficient number of market rate units in there as well. But that's something, I don't know what research has been done on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I don't know how many sociograms have been done to measure what the impacts have been of mixed income housing. What are the trade-offs? What are the costs and benefits of having done that? I think it's been positive more than negative. But because for years, people did not think that people who were paying market rate would live in the same development, whether it's a single building or townhouses, with people who were on public housing, coming out with a housing choice voucher. But it seemingly has worked. It's worked when we've had enough depth in our provision of support services. Either not that we deliver directly, but that we can connect people to. We recognize we have to do that, okay? And we recognize that programs like family self-sufficiency and those kind of upward mobility programs are what, in fact, I think breathes in that ability to have populations that may be very different economically and may have very different social values, where they can work together.
It's the services that we provide and it's the quality of the housing.
Yeah.
You know, and
I agree.
you know, I think we should all be proud that, you know, our housing does not look like affordable housing or what people think of as affordable housing or low income housing. It's a place that most people would be happy to call home.
I do want to give Commissioner Solomon and Commissioner Kroom a chance here quickly to weigh in as well. If you folks have some thoughts or ideas you want to share around this as well, or is this surprising? Do you agree with the general sentiment that's been shared here?
Yes, I do. The one that I'm looking at right now is the 50% or below. That's the one I think we should be at now. We've been doing 30% for a long time. And the rate is going to 30%. Some of them not even paying their rent during the 30% from what we just had to agree on. So I think now being we're in the position to house people, and I just think it should be 50%. Now that should be off the top, 50% or below 50%, depending on your income. So I'm in agreement with that. That's the one that I picked on my paper. That's the one that I would go with at this time.
Only question just on this presentation. I don't know if it was worded this way on the survey, but the middle option here says fewer units at 30%. Was it actually meant to be more units?
No, it's fewer.
So because
yeah. No, so the idea was, you know, you can do more units if you do 80% or below. You require less subsidy. So if you had $100 of
I was just thinking fewer units at 30% also equals more units at 80% or below. So it just seems.
Was that the intent for the 80%?
The intent was
two options that sort of suggest the same thing.
Yeah, that you could do more units if they were at 80% or below. You could do some units less than that at 50% or below. You could do even less than that at 30% or below, because the subsidy would be deeper on each individual unit.
Okay. To me, saying, and I forget if I noticed this at the time or if I made an assumption, but saying fewer units at 30% or below, to me, is the same as saying more units at 80% or below.
Following.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm also, apologies for the confusion. I know it's tough to express it in a way that kind of, but
yeah. It's either more at 30%, some at 50% or more at 80%. Like what's the range that we're aiming for?
Right. Yeah. But sounds like you've all, the discussion, everybody grasped the trade-off, but yeah.
Okay. Just before we move on, Commissioner Solomon, any additional points that you wanted to share on this particular topic area?
No.
No. Okay. Succinct. That's so quick. All right. Let's move it along here to topic number 4. So for these 2 topics, we're getting a little bit more into like the business model that HOC wants to maintain and kind of think about moving forward. So for this one, we're saying as a general matter, what percentage of a given development do you prefer that HOC owns? And the options given were 100%, 80%, 70%, or 51%. So interestingly, we can see here that 2 folks chose 100% and 1 person chose 51%. And interestingly, actually the 70 and 80% wasn't selected at all. So I think there is some discussion to be had here about what the ownership model should look like. We did have some comments about why maintaining or prioritizing 100% ownership might actually reduce risks. So some of those comments did talk about, if you have less ownership, that might set you up for other issues down the road. So any thoughts here from folks? Does anyone want to share some context on kind of why they chose the response that they did? I know some folks had, some different thoughts on this question, so would love to hear your feedback on ownership as kind of a concept moving forward for HOC.
I personally don't care. What I care about is, let me back up. Private parties come to HOC, I'm sure because we're the best looking group in town, but it probably has more to do with the money we have and the resources we bring to the table, and tax exemption, insurance exemption in some cases, depending on who owns what. And recognizing that if we're going to share ownership with a private party, we should be getting more. From what little I've seen in prior deals, we had a long discussion about one deal where things were changed, fortunately, but we should be getting more from the private parties. I wonder what these private parties would do if HOC just walked away with some of these transactions. We put in a tremendous amount of subsidy, either ours or the counties. We take risk. And to me, the answer to the question is, how much are we getting for the risk that we're taking and the money we're putting in, rather than caring about whether we're 100% or 43.5% or whatever. Which is why I said I wrote numbers down that you should just ignore the numbers.
When I thought about this one in terms of ownership, I view it from the standpoint that in the roles that HOC plays as both a developer, a housing finance agency, perhaps we issue bonds and a whole range of things we do to bring capital to resources to the agency, that we've got to look at how the financing community looks at us and looks at our portfolio. Okay? Because I think that for them, an investor is going to give a much more favorable rating to Standard & Poor's, for example, the more that we own, the greater ownership we have, and the length of our ownership of the asset. And I think that affects what we get in terms of our bond pricing and a lot of things we do. And so I'm looking at that in terms of the percent of ownership we have is important in the bigger financing community, as well as just in theory. Yes, I would love to own everything we have, but there may be reasons why there are other reasons why we are going to do a shared ownership, because it has to do with also generating more equity from other sources into our transactions.
Yeah, I guess, for me, it's sort of about the security that is provided by ownership. And, while you touch on one part of that, our ratings are higher because of our large portfolio, and that provides some security. Now that may be less contingent on the percentage, but I was also thinking about the security that it provides us in terms of, we control, we know what our costs are up front. I guess I don't know whether I overlearned the lesson from the Lindley or not, but we partnered with a private partner And, and I think it probably made sense at the time for where HOC was at that time. But it ended up probably costing us a lot more because we got in, in an area that was growing and in value. We got in early on and we helped create a lot of that value in that community by getting in there early. And the private partner was able to cash out on that, and it cost us a lot more later on. And so, that's why I talk about kind of the security that ownership provides us. So it's both like having that portfolio as well as, sort of having some more control over the costs.
Our portfolio for real estate used to not be the way it is now. I've been on this board a long time. The ownership, when we sign off on something that we own, that makes me very proud, and it also makes my constituents very proud. I'm for 100% ownership on anything, and along with the partners. And I always ask, where do we stand in this? And they'll say we get 95% or we'll get 50%. So I'm for ownership because we're in the business to house. We used to not do a lot of real estate. We didn't. And where you were, we didn't do a whole lot way back then. We just started doing it in the last, I'll say 10, 15 years. Yeah, I would say about that time that we really got big. We big now. That's why so many people want to be with us. So that's my 100%.
Thank you, commissioners. I thank you all for sharing your kind of feedback. And I think you all kind of brought a different, kind of lens to the conversation. I do just want to give a minute based on some of the things we heard here around 100% ownership, security, some of those types of things. Does that spark up any other feedback or comments from any of the other commissioners? Anything that you kind of want to say either in support or something else to share, just kind of in response to some of those discussion points that were brought up?
I work around the country, not here in Montgomery County or Maryland, but what struck me about Montgomery County is how few private low-income developers there are. You go almost anywhere else in the country and there is a constituency of for-profit and nonprofit capable and incapable developers of affordable housing. Tax status has nothing to do with it. And Montgomery County has very few. And I love the mixed income model, but you can do 100% tax credit property and do it well, and it works. And in some cases that might be appropriate. If you have the right owner and the right management. The right owner could be the housing authority, or it could be the last party you want to go to. But I don't understand fully why we have so few. Zach, maybe you have a thought. I'd be curious, but New York City is a higher cost area than Montgomery County, Los Angeles, and they've got a huge constituency, not everyone good. And I don't know why we have so few. Is it inappropriate to ask for? I mean, I don't understand it. And I've never done anything here. And I don't have the history.
No, I mean, I agree with you. It really is one of the most remarkable things about the development landscape is that there really are only a couple that have sort of survived to, want to keep doing it in the county. I can't profess to know exactly why, other than to say it is, it's a very hard place to do new construction development, land costs. Previously it really was the LIHTC model. One of the reasons HOC switched to the mixed income model in, the 90s was because volume cap didn't really work very well, and tax credits, doing a tax credit deal in Montgomery County and having the volume cap for it was really difficult. So that was actually part of the original innovation back then by HOC. So I do think there's, and you can go further in terms of how the QAP favors non-urban locations and on and on and on, which I think is a huge part of it as well.
Well, that's interesting to know. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
but
but there's just
certainly-
layers of those things. Yeah.
You know, that's very interesting to know. I didn't realize that. But in terms of costs and difficulty, you know, I've done deals in New York City. You'd be hard pressed to make Montgomery County that hard. Well, I shouldn't challenge Montgomery County, but Los Angeles, I mean, it's brutal.
Sure.
But that's an interesting comment. And maybe that's something we need to be working on. And we'll blame Ken for this issue.
You know, when part of that is interesting. I mean, the whole idea about ownership related to affordable housing is really a phenomenon that occurred in the last 25 years. Because before that, all affordable housing was publicly owned. I mean, come on, let's get real. And it was incentives that the federal government realized they couldn't afford it. So you've got to find another way to induce investment into this marketplace. The low-income housing tax credit was a big driver of that. And again, that ownership is only what? Only as long as there's a value to the credit. And after that, what do? They sell it out to our general partnership, and we get into it and we own it. Am I right? I mean, so let's be real when we talk about ownership. It is a relatively new phenomenon. And so, and a lot of what you see in terms of other nonprofits, this area has not had a strong environment about the creation of CDCs, who have been the major drivers of being the nonprofits involved in affordable housing. There are not a lot of nonprofits in this area who are CDCs who have done that kind of work. Okay, they really aren't. So that's why you don't see a lot of that playing out. And again, the other thing is that you in Montgomery County didn't. It had land. Developers weren't looking to build affordable housing. It wasn't until we provided incentives for them to want to come and do that. Okay, they weren't a bunch of developers running around trying to find affordable housing deals. Give me a break.
Or mandates.
Okay,
Mandates too,
Yeah.
the inclusive.
Inclusive zoning
Yeah.
that Montgomery County had before anybody. So, I mean, there are reasons why we don't see many players in this market. I mean, we deal with the bigger ones: Enterprise, Habitat, List, but not a little nonprofits. They're doing a lot of it. I mean, we created the Preservation Fund as a way to give more capital to nonprofits to be able to play in this arena. Am I right? That was part of it. We look to see what happens.
All right. Well, thanks, folks, for all. I can tell this must be an area we feel very passionately about. We just want to note here, right, this is an ongoing conversation, right? We're not here to make a decision on this today, but I think we've had some valuable feedback and insights shared today. So I do want to move it on. IT is ahead of me to our last topic for today. So that's on disposition. So there wasn't really a rating or anything on this particular area, but we did get some comments back from some commissioners. And I will say, I think this kind of reflects like the general theme of what we've heard today is that the answer here isn't never pursue disposition or always pursue disposition, but it's really that these scenarios need to be treated on a case-by-case basis. There did appear to be some variance here in kind of how open different members of the commission are towards disposition. But again, really kind of highlighting that like there isn't a one answer fits all solution here. But just to kind of wrap us up today for our final topic area, again, would open it up for your comments and feedback here. If there's any other context that you want to share that you think HOC should consider moving forward in regards to disposition.
Well, nobody would guess my answer. I would say I'm not for selling. I'm totally against foreclosing the option, always. I haven't heard a reason from anybody why we shouldn't consider it in every circumstance. We can drop it in a heartbeat, but I have not heard a reason yet why it shouldn't be considered just a standard operating procedure. And there may be 1,000 good reasons to not sell, but we're in a constrained resource environment. We have an aggressive strategic plan. And there might be resources in our portfolio that could be put to other use. And not considering it to me is irresponsible. We can drop it, but not considering it to me is irresponsible.
But
I get, I view it a little bit flipped from that. Like, what is the reason to dispose? I think there has to be, rather than just saying we should automatically consider it in every case, I think there has to be a driving reason to consider it in the first place. I do think it is more likely to be the exception than the rule, because there are, we just talked about the benefits of ownership, and Roy very eloquently discussed the benefits to that beyond just a single property for us, that HOC benefits from its large portfolio and its ratings, that if we were disposing, if we weren't holding on to our properties, we wouldn't have that kind of rating, and it would hamper us in other ways. So, rather than saying to me like it's irresponsible to not consider it, I think I see it as like there's got to be a reason to consider it in the first place.
one of the things I look at it this way. I was a cheerleader for the creation of an asset manager position in HOC. Because I think that's what the role of an asset manager is to look at your portfolio, determine how you position your portfolio to maximize your returns, right? To maximize the benefits, ultimately, the agency to drive other revenues to the agency from what you do with your properties. Do we reinvest? Do we recapitalize? Do we sell it all? I mean, all of those things that I would hope what an asset management function would do in this agency would be to bring that kind of information to the commission and say, look, we've got this property, we've had it in the portfolio for 25 years, or we've had it for 40 years. And it's going to cost us X amount of money to put this property back into the marketplace where it can be competitive, and what's the benefit of spending this amount of money versus selling it off, taking the proceeds from the sale and putting them into doing more affordability in another development. I mean, that's the kind of rigor that I would hope that we would get out of our asset management function.
Mm-hmm.
I'm with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all.
That is the discussion. So I don't mean to suggest that you're being irresponsible, Jeff, but that is the discussion. Is what's the best use of the money? We keep the asset or use the money elsewhere. It's not to build a nice building for ourselves. It's right. You're lobbying to get more resources with, and God bless you for banging your head against the wall. But it's something worth considering. Roy said it perfectly.
And one of the things that I think, again, I'll give kudos to HOC for is the fact that if you look around the country at what the experience has been about RAD, we have done an amazing job with RAD in terms of the one-for-one replacement, literally. We haven't lost units. We have expanded unit availability in our portfolio. And most hasn't been the case in most places. Okay, there's been a lot of authorities who literally went out of business with RAD and lost affordability in their communities. So what we have done, I think you all have done, has been really good work around that whole area of looking at how do you use and maintain and assure that we are providing people who are critical housing needs, getting even more critical, because we see that whole issue around people who are now, who are more, rent challenged or affordability challenged or whatever the term is we use now. Because, you got families now who are homeless. More homeless people are families now than individuals. Shocking reality. So how do we house them? I mean, and so I think that As part of that discussion we have around asset management is around that whole incorporates all of those things, because if we don't drive resources to take care of some of the most vulnerable, nobody else is going to do it.
I'll open it up as well. Commissioner Croom, did you want to share any thoughts here on your stance here? If you have nothing to add, that's okay, but I just want to make sure that we get to hear your feedback on this one here as well.
Oh, of course. I have to agree with our chairman in what he was saying. If we had a property in our portfolio and we had it for 25 years, we could sell it, but we could keep the proceeds. Yes, we could definitely do that and use that money to use it on something else. But our portfolio is big now. It's very big, and some of the properties are old. But I don't think we should sell them. No. I think we should find other ways that we can use the money if that's the case. But no, I'm not in agreement with selling any of our properties. I'm just like playing Monopoly. I want to keep all my properties.
That's the way to make more money.
Yeah.
Alrighty, folks. So we are kind of nearing at the end of my time here, and I'm going to have to leave in 2 minutes because I am already going to be late for another commitment. But I did just want to ask here, like, any kind of final comments that folks want to share before I wrap things up here this evening.
Thanks for your help.
I think it is a continuing dialogue, continuing discussion. It's a dynamic one. And we should keep revisiting it over and over as we work through the work we do, as we look at developments and opportunities and things like that. And I'm comfortable that the staff has the requisite skill sets to be able to do that.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair Priest. Couldn't have said it better myself. With that, President Andrews, if you want to wrap things up for today, I will just say thank you, commissioners. I really appreciate the openness and transparency. I'm really happy that we got through all 5 topic areas, so really appreciate that. And President Andrews, yeah, I'll let you wrap things up for tonight.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Megan. Thank you for your facilitation. Thank you, everyone.
And I'd like to thank the public, staff and commissioners for this conversation. These are the kind of things we have to do more of, you know. So thank you all. And this special session is now adjourned as of 6:22 p.m.
Thanks, folks.
Ladies and gentlemen, the live streaming has now ended.